Today's guest, Cianna Stewart, host of Dying Kindness, and an advocate for a positive approach to the end of life. All right, everybody, let's talk death. Now, hold on, it's not going to be depressing, I promise. Today, on the open highway.
Hello, great minds! Mr. DGMH here, but wait, what the hell is DGMH? DGMH, or Drinks with Great Minds in History, is a weekly podcast that covers one of history's greatest minds each month, while we enjoy, review, and rate themed cocktails, liquors, and beers on the scale of greatness. As greats like Alexander Hamilton square off against George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and more, DGMH is the perfect cocktail of history, sarcasm, and alcohol, with a twist of psych and a bunch of shots along the way. So grab yourself a drink with some great minds in history. Cheers!
The Open Highway with Eric Erickson.
See, I thought you were interesting because I've always been fascinated by death, but not fascinated like one of those people who like dresses in black and put skulls all over themselves. That's a whole other thing.
Yeah,
exactly. But I think there's something not just fascinating about the idea of death or the concept or like what happens or what do you believe or what do you not believe, but there's this way that we treat it, these strange ways that we treat it, whether it's avoiding it or turning it into a huge ceremony or whatever. We just have these very intricate ways of dealing with it. I mean, how did you get pulled into it? Like, how do you suddenly one day wake up and be like, I'm going to deal with death?
Well, the fuller answer, which is, I think, the right thing for this show, is that I don't have any idea. I was a teenager the first time that I did a cross-cultural study in death practices. I was 14. And so I don't fully know what it was that triggered it. I do know, I had already known people who had died by the time I was 14 in my family and also just around me. And then my mother died when I was 15. And so that launched me into a whole different understanding of things. And then I ended up working in HIV in the 1990s. And that was here in San Francisco. So we was full on ground zero for all of that. So that put me into a different universe. And I was also a primary caretaker for somebody who was dying of AIDS, who was my roommate and very good friend. And then the podcast came out of the fact that my dad had diabetes and had been struggling for a long time with that. And I, of course, I'm asking, he's not doing well. He's just in bad shape for years, and I had tried to ask him about his will and paperwork and all of that. And eventually he was like, don't worry about it. I've got to take care of. Okay. He mostly avoided the topic. He died in 2019, and we discovered that he definitely did not have it taken care of. It was like finding his paperwork and all of that stuff was a real mess. And I was super frustrated and angry with him. And it always feels bad to be like angry at somebody who's dead, but I was. And then my stepmother, his wife, was also super stressed out trying to figure all of this stuff out. And my opinion is that this stress contributed to her death just 5 weeks later from a heart attack. And then we found out that she also wasn't together. So I was like collectively mad at both of them. And then as I was driving home, I was driving from LA to San Francisco. I'm on I-5. I'm in my car with all these, huge trucks and everything. And I realized that if I got hit by a car, if I got into a car accident that day, that I didn't have my act together either. So it was kind of like, why am I getting all huffy about it?
Right.
Yeah. So then I decided that I needed to get my paperwork together, talk to some friends. I said, it's easier if we all do it together. Let's just start this. And then suddenly I found I was leading a whole group. And so like emerged out of that. They're like, oh, Cianna, we're so thankful that you know, inspired us to start doing this work. I've been intending to do it forever. And, you know, blah, blah, blah.
That
Thank
doesn't
you so much.
surprise me. That doesn't surprise me at all. I think there's a
No.
lot of people out there who want to deal with it, but they get so
Yeah.
they get a little frightened by it and a little overwhelmed. I mean, what is
Yeah.
it? Like websites like not Zoom, that's what we're actually talking on.
Mhm.
The legal Zoom.
LegalZoom. Yeah.
Like yeah, now you can go on and deal with your will and different things, but
Mhm.
I think people keep putting it off.
Absolutely. People definitely put it off. And, you know, and the majority of people actually die without even a will in the United States, which
I don't
is
have one.
crazy to me. Okay, well,
Yeah,
there
I'll
you go.
admit I'm a first example, you know, but I don't, but I think,
So you're in the majority.
I am, yay, finally for once. But I think for me, part of the reason is I don't feel like I'm not married. I don't have kids. I don't
Mhm.
have, you know, I don't have dependents. So for me, I do think about it from time to time. I'm like, well, maybe I should at least write a note or something that says, you know, here's what to do with my body when I'm done. You know, here's what
Yeah.
I want you to do. But to me, it doesn't seem like something that's important. I bet you run into a lot of people who are in the same boat, right? They're like, yeah,
Yeah.
what does it matter?
Yeah. And I would say from a standpoint of, you know, the distribution of your finances and that kind of thing, the way that most people talk about wills and trusts and all of this stuff is like, what am I leaving behind? And so how important is that, you know, is what you're, and that was kind of where I was too, because I'm, you know, single, I don't have any kids, I don't own anything. Like it's not, I was like, you know, no big deal. I have since learned, and through also my experiences of being a caretaker, caregiver, that is only like the will and the distribution of assets is a very small part of the nightmare that's left behind when somebody dies. And, or actually even more importantly, like the first thing that everybody has to do is an advance directive, because let's say you got into an accident, you're still alive and people have to be making decisions about your care in the hospital, but you're totally incapacitated. And this is a situation that I know a lot of people, including many athletes, get into these, you know, I'm, you know, from a adventuring background, and people who are very fit can be bonked on the head by a boulder while they're out climbing. And then suddenly you actually have to deal with it. And you think, oh, this person is so healthy, they'll, you know, there's no reason that I should have to think about incapacity. But accidents happen to everybody, right?
Yeah.
And while you're unconscious in the hospital, whoever is supposed to be making those decisions, and I hope that you have that communicated to somebody is designated to do it, then that person needs to know, like, what would you want? What are your limits? What are your goals? And also just, let's say your outcome is predictable, it's fine, you know, you're gonna be fine, but for a while you're out of it. Do you have pets that need to be taken care of? Do you have bills that need to be paid? Do you have, you know, who needs to be contacted? What volunteer shifts are you going to miss while you're laid out in the hospital?
You mean I have to tell my boss I'm not coming to work even if I'm dead? That
Or
kind of
just, yeah, or you're in a coma. Oh,
by the
sorry,
way,
I can't fill out my shift because I'm in a coma.
like that's not an excuse. Get in here.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's basically everybody over 18 at least needs to write that stuff down.
No, that's a good point. And keep it with your documents and
yeah. And you know, the number one easy thing that you can do is make sure that you pick somebody to be your emergency contact, and then you put that in your phone, or you have a wallet card, or both.
You should probably tell those people too.
Oh, right? For sure. Yeah, you should tell those people. And you should definitely tell those people, and you should have a conversation with them, you know, like I want you to do whatever you can to keep me alive, or, you know, I'm not interested in being alive on a ventilator, or, you know, whatever you do, as long as I'm not in pain, or like, you know, whatever. So those types of conversations are super important. And I've seen too many people just get torn apart having to make those decisions. And then also, you know, like, especially doing the HIV work in the 90s, and, you know, I was a queer activist for a really long time, and did a lot of stuff where not everybody's family agrees with the way that they're living. And you don't even have to be queer for that to be true. You could just be somebody who's like, I want to be in films, and my family wants me to be an accountant, you know, like they may not know any of your friends, They might not know how to have a memorial for you in a way that would feel true to how you're living your life right now. They may not even know who to call if you got injured.
Yeah. So when you talk to people, well, let's go back. So you have a not a website.
So I have a website and a podcast.
Podcast is where I was heading. I can speak.
This is a podcast, by the way. Did you know?
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah.
I thought it was I thought it was an NFT. Really, I'm like so into that now. But on your you have a podcast and you advise people on this and you help them. Do you run into when people come to you and they're like, look, I need to get my affairs in order, which is kind of an annoying phrase, but I'm going to use it anyway. But when they come to you and they say, okay, I need to get my affairs in order, and you say, okay, well, here's what you need to do. Is there pushback, or do they push back and like, I don't need that, or not, or is there awareness? And they're like, oh crap.
So sometimes there's awareness, but it's usually pretty limited. Even like they're often like this conversation where you start off by saying, I don't have a will. And I'm like, that's kind of like my least concern. Like, I just want you to have an advance directive. I don't think there's pushback in that. I'm not telling anybody to do anything. I'm trying to give people resources. And I'm also trying to shift the conversation from thinking about me and my stuff and my interests and what I think is important to what is the impact that my death or my incapacity would have on the people I leave behind. Like, I just want to think in a kinder way about the people who have to deal with the aftermath, basically. And so that's the whole focus. And so once I start on that way of thinking, there's a whole lot less resistance. And also, I'm not an expert. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a hospice worker. I'm just somebody who's going to die. And I know enough people, and I figure that my death will have an impact on some other people. And I would like to make that not worse than it has to be. Yeah. That's basically it. Yeah.
And there isn't, where is it? I want to say it's in Belgium, but I know it's in Europe, where there's a new, it's either Belgium or Sweden, where there's a death cleanup. Have you heard about that? It's this idea where they're cleaning,
Swedish death cleaning.
There you go. Hey, I was the right country. Yes. I don't see Americans taking to that. I don't really think it's in our makeup. But for those of you who don't know, I mean, do you want to explain it real quick? Like what?
Yeah, there's a book that got to be very famous called The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning. And the idea that Swedish death cleaning as a concept is pretty common. I talked with some friends who are Swedish and they're like, yes, we do actually like have that as part of our culture. It's not just like a book that somebody popularized and, made something up. But it is primarily focused on people as they get a lot older and they get much closer to dying. They're retired, and the idea is that you start giving away the things that you don't need. You start cleaning to make sure that it's easier for your heirs or benefactors or whatever to actually like clean up after you, because your house is going to have to be sold or converted or just given to somebody else, and they're going to do their own thing with it. So the concept is you clear your house with that in mind. And or that if you still have things that you want to, keep, of course, because you're still living it, but at least you have those conversations with people and you find out like what matters to them that they'd want. In the United States, there's also a movement. So right now there's a overall death positivity movement that's starting, which is very fantastic. And there's more people who are death cleaners in the United States, at least have as their role cleaning up after somebody has died. But more and more, we're starting to see people thinking about not just accumulating stuff, but actually like it kind of goes along with the minimalist movement and the small house movement and all of that to get down into like, what's important? What do I need to have here, or what can I give away? Yeah. So I don't know that it's really going to catch on. This is also the country that spawned Hoarders, the TV show. So there's certainly going to be like a wide range of reactions to this. It's a big country.
Well, we have in the United States, like we do things differently because, we have assisted living homes, and we have a lot of these situations where at the end of life, our older family members get put in one of these places. So usually there is a downsizing before they go in. And I mean, my family, I'm going to use my family a lot because we are not the normal family when it comes to death. We have a very dark sense of humor in my family because a lot of people have passed away and a lot of them have died in very strange ways. So in my family, we have a really weird way of looking at it. So literally, like my grandmother, before she passed, started putting people's names on everything. She literally had those little tags, and she wrote Eric or my mom's name or my sister's name, and she would put them on things. So when she died, literally we picked them up, like, oh, mine. And it kind of turned into this odd little thing. But in this country, you know, we do have the downsizing. While other countries, the elderly will a lot of times move in with their family, or they'll have different situations.
Or
So we treat it differently.
they'll have adult kids moving into the older person's home, you know, to keep them in their home longer. I mean, so the statistics are that apparently in the United States, fully 70% of people say that they want to die in their homes, but like 15% actually do.
Yeah.
So there's a definite effort to close that gap a bit and to create systems so that people can stay in their homes longer. You know, hospice is a really good part of that, so that, you know, if you can make the home safe and just focus on comfort care, that maybe somebody can stay there longer. It's not fun to die in a hospital, although most people do. And, you know, the other thing is just this push away from, you know, putting people into homes, I think is especially exacerbated by COVID, because at the beginning of, you know, that was like a crazy wildfire of spread through so many different assisted living facilities and what I call skilled nursing facilities or nursing homes. And, you know, it was really bad. And so I think I know personally some people who kept their parents home longer, or move them into their homes, or did what they could in order to keep people out of those situations. We also have dementia on the rise, and that makes it a lot harder to keep people in those homes. So yeah, there's some cleanup that has to go, but you kind of want, before somebody is that frail or has dementia or anything like that, you want them to be able to go through their stuff too and just say, like, this is important and this is yours and this doesn't matter, and here's the incredible story that's attached to this little cup. You didn't know that this cup was so, you know, filled with stories. So
that's the important, I mean, that's what I think gets missed.
Yeah.
And I want to touch on that for a second, because you brought up a great point. And again, I'll use my family as an example. We're very into my family history. We're very into genealogy. Anybody who listens to the show knows I talk about it all the time. And so we have a lot of things. As you can see, I'm kind of a collector too, but this is just one side. But we have a lot of stories that go along with these things. Some of them, my family came out on the wagon train. So we still have items that were brought out on the Conestogas. And I have my great grandmother's diary that she wrote as they were working their way across the country. Just an example.
Yeah. Wow.
So suddenly something goes from, when someone passes away, suddenly the story's gone. If you haven't logged it for your family, or even worse, a fake story comes up. Right. Suddenly that Avon bottle is now a 200-year-old, you know, relic, and it's like, no, she got it at a garage sale in '87.
Right.
You know, so it's important. Are there ways that you advise them to get those tales down, or to try to pass that legacy on to the next generation? Do you ever work with them on that?
I have not yet, and I really want to. You know, I would highly recommend that people take advantage of StoryCorps. They do some great training on how to interview relatives to get stories out, and how to use recording equipment if you haven't done it before. I think they even have like an online thing now, so that if you want to just like capture some stories, there's some new programs for like emailing elders questions, and then they'll just, you know, respond, and then eventually they'll collect those into a book. Yeah, no, I think that any effort that you can make to get those stories down, I think is fantastic. And, you know, one of the other things, if you do end up getting diagnosed with dementia, like right at the very beginning, start recording all the stories, because you don't want to wait at that point. You know, that's kind of the moment where like everything gets into like super strong focus of Like this has to happen now. We don't have any time left.
Yeah.
So
I heard about it in the news in the last couple of weeks. There's a new AI program you may have heard of where it's not true AI. It's not like they're creating like a ghost in a shell kind of situation. They're not doing that, but they are having people record stories, and then they put it into an app AI program. And it's more like I would go, Grandma, tell me a story about when you were a teenager. And they have all the stories are already in there. And they're like, okay, I'm going to tell you a story about when I was 13. And it's like, it recognizes the questions. So it's not a conversation, but you're able to pick topics and ask them, and then it'll give it back. That's all I know about it. It sounds like a really great way of
definitely
doing it.
And there was a story on 60 Minutes. I live with my 83-year-old aunt now. I'm helping her out. So I watch 60 Minutes now, like every Sunday. Totally.
What are the wait, 60 Minutes, Blue Bloods.
Yeah, it's just amazing.
Wheel of Fortune.
Yeah, she actually doesn't watch any of those. The only regular thing is, watching Anderson Cooper or watching 60 Minutes. And, I'm like, okay.
They all love Anderson.
Yeah, they all love Anderson Cooper. Absolutely. And then she's like, wait, who is this mom again? And it's like we have this conversation like multiple times a week. It's very cute. But on 60 Minutes, they actually had this really cool story about having interviewed a bunch of, I believe they were veterans, World War II veterans or some other veterans, of their stories, and then creating an AI-driven interview booth where you could actually go in and ask questions. And it did start to feel like a conversation. And
that's so cool.
It was really cool. And, of course, so that's a like rarefied air, but the fact that technology exists now is like, it's coming down the way. There's a lot of people who are doing experiments in that. There's other AI driven things for like they load in all of the books by an author, and then the AI learns the way that author writes and some of their style, and then can actually generate a new story.
I've heard of that. It's called Jarvis. There's one that does that. Right. And you tell them, you're like, write it in. I want it written like Jack London. Yeah. And they'll literally like pop it out. It's incredible. It's expensive, but it's expensive.
Exactly. But like all of this is starting to come down the way. And so, is there a way that, especially now, we all write so many emails, we write so much all the time in our current life. I could easily imagine something in the future where you can upload all of your stuff so that somebody can have a conversation with you after you're dead, and is that creepy to some people? For sure. And for other people, it's like a super comfort. And maybe is there a way that you can age out so that you don't like live in the past forever? I don't know. It's all really interesting questions.
But isn't that's part of that conversation you need to have? Because, we have this culture, and if you don't agree, please tell me that I'm wrong. But I feel like we have this culture where when someone dies, where it's about their last wishes, which I get, but at the same time, we're still here.
Yeah.
So if their last wish is something that does not bring closure or comfort to the people who are still here, it seems kind of selfish. And it's like, I understand if you're like, look, I want to be buried in a Cadillac with my trophy wife or whatever, and just make sure she's not alive. But I understand that, that's your last wish. But if your last wish is able to be like, well, you know what, I'm going to leave something for those left behind so they can feel comfortable, so they can move on. Whether it's, this is what I wanted to ask you about, is now we have different ways of burial. It used to just be you have the grave in the ground, or you have the mausoleum, that's it. And now you can get naturally buried in the forest. There's the fungus ones I've always found kind of interesting.
Yeah, the mushroom soups.
Yeah, you can get your ashes cremated into a diamond. You can, there's all of these different things. Now, if I went, again, I'm not married, I don't have kids, I don't have anybody, so I don't have to worry about that right now. So I can be selfish. But if I did something that was more connected to the people left behind, if I was married and the person I was married to loved the idea of having a ring with my ashes and that meant a lot to them, then that would be something I would want to do to help them. Do you talk to people about that? About it's more than just your wishes, it's about helping heal?
Yeah. I feel like that's the entire focus of my approach is to really take a look at it from the impact on the people that are left behind. And like, what is it going to be for them to heal, for them to feel like they're honoring you and all of that. You know, there's also ways in which the ways that we die or that we get buried or not buried or whatever version of, you know, body disposition you care for, you know, that term, final disposition. Is there a way that's in alignment with your life, you know? And it does, like, I think you want to have these conversations in a really thoughtful way. One of the other things that's true is that historically people, you know, got buried in the churchyard or on the homestead.
Yeah.
Now we all move around so much, and we often are moving away from like the family plots. So I was having a conversation with somebody just the other day who was talking about how in her mind, she's always wanted to have her burial be back with her family stuff. Well, that's on the East Coast, and her kids have actually never even visited there because now they don't have any relatives anymore that live in that town. It's just all the dead people are there. And so she wants to go back to that plot, but like her children would have no connection with that. And so is that the right place? You know, is it that now she should be here? There's, you know, my feeling is that it's like, there's no one right answer. It's so personal. And it also depends on who you're with and you know what is important at that time. These decisions are not fixed in stone either. Like if I say I want to be buried here, but then, you know, 10 years from now I've now created an entirely other life somewhere else, like who's to say that I'm not going to change my mind at that point? Also, things may emerge between now and then that are better. Like now, I don't know if you've heard about human composting. It's called Recompose up in the Seattle area. And so that is the first facility for that. That was not around and legal and operational when I first drew things up for myself. Now I'm like, I should totally think about that. And, you know, people who are very environmentally minded might say like, yeah, that's the right way to go. Yeah. And there's like a version of cremation that uses water. It's called aquamation.
Desmond Tutu just did that, right?
Oh, really? I didn't.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's cool. I did not know that Desmond Tutu did that. Thank you. See,
I told you, I'm up on my death.
You're up on your death stuff. Fantastic.
I'm a Viking. I'm going for the burning funeral. That's what I'm gonna. The arrow and
the arrow, yeah, which is primarily a myth, actually. But you know, hey,
I know, but
it's still lovely and awesome.
So are the horns.
So are the horns. You know. Whatever. Doesn't mean that they'll matter to you. Yeah.
I think there's another thing too, is I think there's a lot of people, and I've run into this, where they get divorced, or they get remarried, and they're like, well, I already have the plot. And it's not some emotional connection. It's like, well, you know, I already spent a couple $1,000s or whatever it is on a plot. It's like, I can't change that. What am I going to do? Sell it back? What am I going to do? There's got to be options. There have to be ways to do that.
So I have a personal story that feeds into exactly that question. I told you my mom died when I was 15. We lived 2 blocks from a cemetery. And so my dad bought a double plot there so she's buried there in that cemetery. We have all since moved out of that town. And my dad later on got remarried. When he died, he and my stepmother both decided to get cremated. When they arranged for the cremations, because they did it through, what's it called? The Neptune Society. So that, you know, all of that pre-arrangement stuff has been handled. And so they paid for it in advance, and you just call the Neptune Society and they pick up the body and they give you the ashes at the end. And so when they paid for that and decided that's what they wanted, my dad was like, well, so I still have this extra plot that's next to your mom, so I'm giving that to you. And I was like, okay, well, I personally am not interested in being buried in a cemetery, but it's not like I'm going to refuse that. So now I have this plot next to my mom in a cemetery that I don't want to be in. My dad's ashes are scattered where he wanted. His wife's ashes, his stepmother's wife, my stepmother's ashes are scattered where she wanted. And it's all a mess. It just feels like the worst thing. And so then I called the cemetery and I was like, can I sell this plot? Like, and he's like, yeah, a lot of people are selling plots now because cremation is far more popular than burial now. For the first time, it was like 2 years ago. It was the first time that it actually like overtook burials in the United States as the preferred option. So there's a lot of plots. Apparently you can go on Craigslist and just find cemetery plots for sale.
There's something really shady about that.
It just feels weird, right?
Yeah. It's like it's going on like Let's Go, the app, and be like, I have rollerblades and a cemetery plot. What do you want?
Yeah, and an old crock pot. Like what,
But that means you're a land baron. You're a land baroness or a landowner.
So now I have a deeded title to a plot of land.
You can put a little ranch around it.
I should totally. I should like make a little Barbie scape, whatever out there for sure. Yeah, it's very weird. It's just like the most uncomfortable bequeathing thing that I've received. And I'm like, I still don't know what to do with that. Yeah.
You have a really good sense of humor about this. I mean, does it ever get to you? Do you ever hear stories, or does someone ever come to you and you just kind of take it on?
Yeah. I mean, the truth is that I take it all on, that I feel it all insanely deeply. And I think that there's a way that the sense of humor is my coping. I also was raised by a super intellectual New England guy that, we're not real criers. Or like, I've turned into a Northern California hugger. But
there's a tree over there.
Yes. Well, no, I also like hugging people. But I still don't really cry around other people particularly easily. But yeah, I do feel it. I do care a lot. I mean, I care so deeply about this, that this is why I'm doing the podcast. Like, this is why, because I feel how horrible it can be. And I know how hard grief is. And I've been devastated by it. I've had, periods in my life where I was like ridiculously depressed and completely shut down, could not talk to anybody for weeks. And I'm very familiar with what that is like. I was borderline suicidal at one point. I was just like, I can't not feel that stuff. And I'm also really good at compartmentalizing stuff. And I have a really dark sense of humor and always have. So yeah, kind of like all of that stuff is true at the same time.
Do you feel like you're protecting them? I don't know if protecting is the right word, but do you feel like you're a pillar of strength for them sometimes, that it's kind of, you're taking on this mantle of like, I will be strong so you can get through this? Yeah,
that it's funny that you should say that. That is one of a role that I have played for in many situations. Yeah.
I'd also think too, it's like there's so many aspects to it because obviously there's the emotional part of it, and that's really hard. That's a given. But there's also this odd financial part of death, and I don't mean the estate and all of that. There's the dealing with the process, and there's always been this kind of gruesome the mortician who is the sunken eyes, and usually they're like really tall, and they're like, just give me the money, don't ask questions. And and I've done research, and I've seen investigative reports over the years, and plus having family members die, we dealt with it, where it's like, well, this coffin, you want them in this coffin because it's the top of the line. Well, it doesn't really matter. Or it's hermetically sealed. It's like, okay, well, it doesn't really matter. Or you need the undercoating or whatever. There's all of these little fees, and people are in this moment where they don't want to do bad things or what they think is bad. They want to give their departed the best send off they can, but then there are these industries that are poised to make money off of that.
Yeah.
So then they come to you and they must be falling apart. And I don't mean that in a lighthearted kind of way, but the last thing when you're dealing with a death is you want to have to worry about, am I getting a good deal on the coffin,
Mhm.
or am I being taken advantage of? Do you advise them on that, or how does that play into it?
Well, yeah. So once again, I'm not really like an advisor. I'm like, yeah, a death journalist. Death is my beat. So
I have an editor who would love to hear
yeah,
that.
it's kind of how I think about it. So, I try to like learn as much as I can and then impart back what I learn. What you're pointing to was certainly like the subject of Jessica Mitford's book, The American Way of Death, in the 1960s. And that was one of the, if not the single most influential book on the funeral industry, and taking a look at what they do, and the patterns of taking advantage of people. When people are grieving, they're super stressed. They're like, they're just like in a terrible frame of mind to be making big financial decisions. Plus there's a whole way that we judge other people on like how much you care about somebody based on like, what kind of gifts you give them. And so this feels like the final gift to express your love. And so that's a perfectly huge opening for any unscrupulous funeral directors to take advantage of that. I'll say that word is that most funeral directors are not unscrupulous, and they don't do that. And they really resent the fact that the entire industry has been painted with that brush. But it's also something that is true, and it does happen. And there are a few corporations that have bought up a huge percentage of funeral homes, which almost all were like family run. And, the whole 6 feet under scenario is actually very accurate. And so these corporations they're pretty horrible. And they do train people on how to upsell in the moment of grief and how to use that guilt to pressure somebody to spend more. And I personally think that that's another reason why you want to make these decisions in advance and be super clear with people about what you do and don't want, so that they can also turn to like, well, this is what they wanted. Like they wanted a simple pine box. They did not want like the velvet, maple stained, blah, blah, blah kind of thing. And especially if anybody is at all environmentally minded, what we call now the traditional burial, which is not actually all that old as a burial style, is something that is incredibly destructive to the environment. And if anybody tries to sell you a hermetically sealed casket, run. That is not the place you want to be. That is also a lie. Those things don't work. It's bonkers to think like, I'm going to try to keep a body preserved in there. Like for what purpose? Also the casket, what they don't often tell you is that in traditional cemeteries, they put a cement vault there first. So they dig a hole, they put a whole cement vault, and then the casket goes inside of that. And so anybody who knows anything about environmental stuff, like that amount of concrete going into the ground it's just horrible. And it's also just a terrible use of land and all of that kind of stuff. So I certainly have my opinions. And at the same time, there's a way that there's some importance, especially, so we get into certain communities have not had access to that kind of burial for a very long time, most pointedly the African-American community in the United States. And so that kind of burial is actually really important to that community, because it's in certain arenas, like they didn't used to be able to be buried in the main cemetery. So to say, well, now I'm going to judge you for environmental reasons, when actually there's this whole crazy racist overtone to how you've been treated in the past around your own funeral practices. Like, I'm not in the position to tell somebody how they can be buried, but you do need to have a conversation with people so that they know what you wanted, and so that you feel comfortable. Like maybe it isn't about what you wanted, but it's what are they comfortable doing or executing, It's also sometimes it gets down to like, do you want a priest there or not? Do you want to be in this cemetery or that one? Do you want to be in the Jewish cemetery? Do you want to be in the conservation cemetery? Do you want to be, have your body dumped in the ocean? Who knows?
Yeah.
But you should talk to somebody and then just know that they're the ones who can do it, because sometimes you're going to ask for something that people are not comfortable doing.
Or they can't do. How many times
do.
I want to have my ashes thrown in center field at Wrigley Field.
Oh yeah, right.
Well,
Yeah,
probably not going to happen. That's what I
No.
want. You figure out a way, or I'll come back from that'll haunt you.
right. I'll haunt you dressed like a baseball player, throw things at your head. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, so you need to know, like, what can you really do?
Yeah. And if you want something like that, you be the one to arrange it. I mean, go for it. If that's really what you want and you're like a major donor to the Cubs, then go. That's right. Wrigley Fields is the Cubs. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Like hard. Wow. That old knowledge there. So yeah, if you maybe you're somebody who has like the premium box forever and you've sponsored all the things and you can talk to you, arrange it. Don't ask somebody else to arrange it. If you've got some bonkers idea, then, and it may actually be super fun. Like I know people who have created their own playlists and made the party arrangements and have done the whole thing because that's what they wanted. And so they just went for it. I'm like, that's fantastic.
And there's other people who don't want anything.
They don't want anything.
They're like, just go have a drink and talk about me. Don't have a funeral. Don't have a memorial service. Don't do anything.
Yeah. Or like, I really want an Irish wake. I want everybody drunk and telling really bawdy stories at my thing. Yeah, that sounds fantastic.
It's such a strange thing because you just said it. You're like, take responsibility for what it is that you want.
Yeah.
And I would you agree that in the United States we don't do that for when it comes to our death? It's like, no, I'm dead. I don't have to work anymore. It's up to you now. That's till death do us part, and then I get to date. Yeah. That's kind of the approach that a lot of people have.
I refer to it as outsourcing your discomfort, because because most people are like, oh, it doesn't matter, I'm dead. And they're like acting all like macho about it or whatever. And I'm like, no, you just really don't want to talk about it. You're really uncomfortable with the idea of your death. And so you're mostly like, I don't want to, I'm running away from this conversation, but I'm going to do it in this way that sounds really like macho and who cares? And it's really like, oh, so you just want to put the burden of the decision and everything onto your loved ones in the moment that they're going to be like among the most stressed that they are in their entire lives.
Yeah.
That's great. How kind. And they have to make these decisions in the first 2 to 3 days after your death. So you're
they're eating casserole. It's always some casserole that's brought over.
400 casseroles, like not just one. Yeah.
Why is that? I know I've heard that it's because they keep for a long time. I don't know if that's the truth, but
it's because you can stick them in the freezer and then you just throw them in the oven, and it's a nice no thinking kind of thing. And it is true that while you're in the throes of grief, there's highly likely you're not going to eat very much at all, which is not great for you. But also that you just don't want to make any decisions. And so people want to do something. They don't know what to do. So the trope that has been handed down through all of the books and movies and, churches everywhere is bring them some food. Okay, here's some easy food to eat. You don't have to think about anything. You know how to turn on an oven. This is a casserole. But that's another nice thing to do is if you can come up with like what somebody should do, then that's great. Like
to support the people that are left behind. I mean,
to support the people who are left behind, or maybe they are the people left behind and they don't know what to do with themselves. And so it's like, what I would like for you to do is to make sure that the dog gets walked and that you keep up my garden, or you donate money to this organization, or because people have to do something, so you have to give them something to do, otherwise you're going to end up with 400 casseroles.
And people also work better when they have a task, because we have that anxiety around death, whether it's fear-based, religion-based, just societal based, it's an avoidance issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, and I've known people like that. Someone's died and they're like, well, I don't want to deal with the death. So I am going to go literally make 400 casseroles because then I don't have to think about it.
Right.
It's that avoidance. So if you can tell them
Yeah.
that, it's a
Yeah.
great
And
thing.
I can certainly relate to that. Like when my mom died, my dad and I then immediately got into a big fight because I was like, I have to go to school. He's like, you're not going to school. That's just, and I was like, I can't sit around because if I sit around, then I'm going to feel a bunch of stuff and I am not prepared for that. And so you do hear stories about people who go back to work like sooner than other people are expecting. And they're like, oh, I guess they're doing fine because they're here at work and they're working. And I'm like, yeah, or maybe they're really not doing fine. And this is the only thing that is keeping that pain at bay. And they're just kind of like titrating it right now. And so let them work, but also don't maybe push them on anything really hard because they're probably pretty fragile right now.
Yeah.
That we all have different ways of coping. Some people shut down and eat a lot of bonbons. Some people decide to go for a run that's like 5 miles longer than their normal run. Some people go back to work, and it's also like if they're panicked about the finances after somebody dies, which happens a lot, then of course they're also going to go back to work because that's like the only thing that they can think about right now is I don't have any money or I don't know how I'm going to pay for any of this. And so like, what do you do when you don't have money? You go and get money. And like, but it doesn't mean that somebody's not grieving. And I guess that's the message that I want to say, because a lot of times people look at like, oh, I guess it wasn't that bad, or I guess they're doing okay. And it's like, oh, they're probably not.
No, in my family, when somebody dies, it's usually about 2 weeks. We're a very action oriented family, especially my mother. And because she's always been the one who's had to deal with the deaths, whether it was her siblings or her parents, grandparents, all different people. And that's just the way she works. So she is like a rock for like the first week. And then the second week you start to see the cracks. And that's when she does her grieving. And I take after her and the rest of my family. That's how we do it. We crack jokes for the first week at the funeral. And then the second week, we all start to grieve in our own way because it's not a one size fits all way for everybody. Everybody's going to be different.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to have a different way of approaching it.
Totally. And I mean, the other thing that is misunderstood, people talk about the 5 stages of grief and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's, research on all that kind of stuff. But if you actually read the original, she did not lay it out as like a linear path. And people think that when you call it stages, it's like people think you kind of graduate from one to another until at the end you accept it. And it's more like, I just think of it as like a pinball machine, that you hit one and then something else happens and then you don't know, and you might feel fine for a while. And then you might, it's also true that we're all capable of feeling more than one thing at the same time. Like you could be in incredible pain and still be laughing your ass off.
Oh, absolutely.
Like
absolutely.
those things just go together. When my mom died, I basically went numb for a year. I didn't feel any highs or lows for like a year. And then after a year, I was working as a peer counselor for a teen crisis house at the time. And the guy who was the one running the program took me out to lunch and was just kind of like, hey, just wanted to check in. And he just created the right amount of space. And it was somebody that I really trusted. And then all of a sudden it was like, boof, and I felt everything. But it was like a year later, So you just don't know. And I got re-triggered into grieving her another time 7 years ago because something happened. And like, I just really wanted to talk to her about it and I couldn't. And then I just kind of lost it. So it's like, it's not a linear path. And it's not like you get over something. I don't know if you saw the show Tick, Tick, Boom.
No, I've seen the trailer. I haven't actually seen the
Oh my gosh. Yet. It's really beautiful. It's really beautiful. And there's a wonderful interview with the actor who played it. And he was talking about grief in this because he was experiencing grief in his real life at the same time he was playing this character where the whole movie is about somebody who's now dead. And he was just talking about how important grief is to him as a symbol of how much he loves. and that he never wants to let go of the grief because it would feel to him like that the love had disappeared. I mean, you can get it into a different way of metabolizing it and expressing it, you know, but there's a little bit of that sadness is gonna stay because you miss somebody, you know. And I'm like, that I understand that.
That gives it gravity in a way. It gives it kind of a responsibility to keep their memory alive or keep the feelings alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can understand it. It seems very morbid, but at the same time, it's not, because you're
Yeah.
not saying don't be Queen Victoria and walk around for the rest of your life in black and mourn
Right.
your husband, but you can still miss them and show a responsibility for their memory by whatever way you can approach it.
Yeah.
Which makes me ask you a question. So I'm going to use you an example. When your mother passed
Mm-hmm.
and you grieved for her, were there lessons that you learned, or were there things when you were like, you know what, I need to look at my life differently because of her leaving or because of her death?
Yeah, I definitely got into a space where I was like, what am I even doing here? And, you know, I was just crushed. It was very hard. My dad completely fell apart because her death was really sudden and unexpected. And I remember it was like having a vision of her. You know, I was very like, I am completely questioning my reason for being around. And she basically came down and yelled at me and was like, I died. You didn't. You got to keep, you know, what are you doing?
You got metaphysically smacked.
I totally got metaphysically smacked, which is a very appropriate thing from my mom. Just being like, hello, wake up. What are you doing? This is ridiculous. You are being ridiculous right now. You are still alive.
Yeah.
And I've kind of carried that with me, you know, and through many of the other deaths, it just that I've experienced this feeling of we are only here for a short amount of time. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking the other day about this, that the amount of time that you have not existed far exceeds the amount of time that you have existed for all of us. Mm-hmm. And so you being alive is actually the anomaly.
Like, well, that's deep.
Yeah.
That's very deep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of a surprise that you're here. It's completely by chance. Mm-hmm. And so take advantage of it. And you only get a certain amount of time. I didn't think that I was going to live even, you know, I'm now in my mid 50s, and I didn't think that I was going to live this long because I knew so many people who had died young that I just kind of had in my mind, like, I don't know, I was only going to live until 30. So in so many ways, I am now feeling like I'm still in bonus time, but I fill my days with so much gratitude. And other days that I'm just like, I just want to lie around and watch Netflix. Like, you know, it's not like every day I'm a spiritually enlightened being, but, you know, it is a good reminder. One of the things about working with death and with people who are dying and just being around people who are grieving is to take a look at your life and to say, you know, like, is this what I want to be doing? Am I with the people I want to be with? Do I feel appreciation for the things that are around me? You know, the sunrise is gorgeous every day and it's kind of amazing. And you know, and you can just be stunned into like an appreciation, or you can just like, you know, not even notice it.
That's the self-reflection.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it's odd. I'll use this as an example. So we're recording this on Monday, and Bob Saget died yesterday. Mm-hmm. So I used to teach his kids rock climbing.
Oh, really?
And yeah, so he was going through a divorce, and he would come into the rock gym, and he was not pleased with his ex-wife. And he was very, very colorful in the way that he described her in the relationship, but he did it in a comic way. Mm-hmm. And I really enjoyed those times. Not like I was like his hugest fan. I always thought of it and I was like, wow, this guy's getting divorced. And he was he was pissed, but he was still able to joke about it. So like today, it was reflecting on that and kind of looking back at it and being like, wow, what can I learn from this situation? He was in my life a very small amount of time, but he did have an effect on my life. So it's like, okay, what's the positive that I can take away from that? How can I reflect on it and try to make my life a better path based on what I learned from him? But it seems like we there's and it makes sense why we do it, but I think we definitely wallow in the grieving sometimes. And I think there's a time when you need to, like, your mother died. I can totally understand. I know when mine eventually passes, I have a feeling my situation will be very similar to yours. I know it's going to be a really, really difficult time, but I have to be able to find those positives. I have to be able to find those places where, what can I learn from this? How can I go on with a smile or put a little sunshine in my day? It's easier said than done, though.
Definitely.
It's when you're in the middle of it.
Definitely it is. And, it's also wrong, I think, to feel an obligation to like not feel sad. It's like, if you do feel sad, feel it. Actually suppressing it makes it last longer. So if you go all the way into it, and then if you can invite in an appreciation for the times that you did have, a ways to say, wow, this is amazing that I have these memories. So many people don't have these memories or didn't have this much time, or, I'm glad that we did this. I have this wonderful, joyful memory that I can carry forward. And, can you allow yourself to appreciate that memory and not just have you go into a immediate, like, I'm so sad that I'm never going to have one of those again. Like, well, you could have also never had one in the first place. So can you invite that in to soften things and to also just, feel more deeply into the relationship even after somebody is dead?
What about people that you don't miss, though? No, I'm being I'm joking a little bit, but at the same time, I can speak. I'll speak honestly because heck, no one's listening. When my father wasn't exactly. We didn't have a good relationship, and he died when I was 19. And at the time, I didn't grieve him. I didn't sit there and be like, I miss him, this and that, love and what. That wasn't the case. I ended up grieving the potential of what could have been. Maybe we would have mended our ways. Maybe, he would have been proud of me on this or whatever, and it took a long time. How do you deal with those kinds of things when it's somebody that you're supposed to grieve because we're told we are their family member or someone, but you don't?
I think that supposed to be is the key phrase in there. We never know how somebody's going to impact us. And I believe in trying to be as authentic and true as possible to how you actually experience somebody. There's some people who you don't know particularly well, but they said something and it just landed and you have this warm feeling about them for the rest of your life, even though you only like interacted with them for a day or whatever. And then you have somebody maybe that you know better that you didn't, bond with, or that was very difficult, or that actually made your life worse. And so there could be guilt around feeling maybe relief that person is gone, or maybe disinterest in them being here or not, because you weren't that close anyway. I think that rules around what we are supposed to feel are not useful. That's my personal opinion. You can honor your father as a father, just the role, thank his role in bringing you to life, and then just be like, and it kind of didn't go much farther than that.
And
so
well.
After that, maybe you could be glad that like you didn't have the kind of dad where you're like actively angry at him and are so glad to be done with him. Like, okay, so he's not on that scale, so that's cool. It wasn't the warm person that you wanted it to be, or you didn't have the kind of relationships that you imagined having. We can only deal with the people that we have. We can't wish them to be other than who they are. And there's a way that I think when we're grieving an image of somebody, that is way more about us than it is about that other person, because
Yeah.
we're holding on to something that's a wish, but we're not actually dealing like in reality with the person that's in front of us.
Well, there's a weird religious aspect to it too,
Mhm.
especially in the United States, Christian nations, where you're like, well, they're dead. So they're either up there watching what I'm doing or they're down below getting what they deserve. So it's like we don't even really
Mhm.
let them go in certain cases, if that's with that belief system, because it's like, oh, they're still around and they're suffering or they're an eternal, so the story goes on.
Yeah.
So that affects how our closure happens because of that. And I'm not belittling anyone's beliefs when I say that. It's a fact, because you
Mhm.
can't, it's hard to go on, close that book,
Yeah.
because there's
Yeah.
still something going on in your mind.
There is. And most of the religions do have practices to help you do some kind of a closure, to do some kind of maybe you are thinking of them. I feel like it's an extraction to say that now they're watching over me from up there. I don't know. When somebody goes to heaven, they're probably meeting up with all their old friends.
I would
you know
hope they were busy. They
Yeah,
were partying or
exactly. Yeah, come
something,
on. Like you could play the best bridge game of your life up there. Like, who knows what. Like, yeah, you always win at slots in heaven. Like,
we
that's amazing.
we joke about my grandmother is that she was married several times, and that she outlived them all. And so the joke was that she went to heaven and they're all waiting for at the gate, and basically like, you really want to let her in?
Right. Yeah, that's true. Some people are going to have to like get some reckoning when they get out of here, because yeah. So I don't know. I'm being a little facetious, but I mean, as you can tell, I'm not particularly religious anymore, ever was really. And
but you still
so
have to adhere to that, when not adhere, but you still have to keep that in mind when you're dealing with somebody, because you do
yes,
have to kind of meet them where they
where
believe,
they are.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that that's the most true thing that you can do, is to really be with somebody where they are,
Mm.
and some people have very different beliefs than I do. And I just have to, like, I'm kind of here for, like, let's just start with the, like, can you acknowledge that you're going to die? That's the one thing that we have that's true for all of us. It's the only thing that's guaranteed after you're born.
Mhm.
So, like, that's the one thing that can unify us. What you
Have you
do
ever
about it is, like, that's very different.
have you ever seen? There's a show called Adam Ruins Everything. Have you ever seen that show?
Mm-mm, no.
I'll have to send you a link, because it's a show where it was a show where they go through and they talk about different subjects, and then they kind of say, well, here's the truth about how things go. And they did one on death, and it's really interesting because it starts out with the host staring at the camera, and the camera's moving in on him very dramatically, and he's like, here's the truth. He basically said what you just said, and he's like, the fact of the matter is, we're all going to die. We're all going to live to a certain age. Our bodies are going to stop. We're going to decompose. Life will go on. And he goes on, the camera's getting closer and closer and closer. And you're like, oh my God, this is going to be a really serious episode. And then they cut and they realize he's on a date, and he's talking to his date. And she's just like, okay, did you want to order food? But
I'm worried about turning into that person, by the way. Yes. Anyway. Yeah.
But it's
Carry
very
on.
much about, like, we have a hard time admitting it. We're all going to
Yeah.
die. It's like death and taxes. It's all going to happen. That's
Yeah.
the two things
And
we
not
can
everyone
rely
pays their
on.
taxes. So,
No, but everybody dies,
Yeah.
or they disappear.
Mhm.
When you do deal with people, and you're working with them and you're trying to help them, are there resources? I mean, obviously legal resources and that kind of stuff, but are there
Mhm.
mental health resources that you try to give them for understanding? I mean, some people, religious people, are going to respond to one thing. Some people are going to need something a little more,
Mhm.
uh, again, I'm not belittling, but rational based, or like
Mhm.
almost scientific based,
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is a whole thing about it, is like, we have so many practices and common traditions around death in this country, but they do mostly spring out of religion. And so if you are an atheist or you're outside of religion in some way, you know, you have to create your own tradition and your own practices. And so that is a whole other thing. I am a total bookworm. I just read voraciously all the time. And so the main thing that I do is to point people towards different books that I've found that are really helpful. I'm trying to interview people on the show that have that kind of expertise in this, that, or the other thing. There are a lot of different online resources, and that, so I've been like sharing what I find as much as possible. And it does include some things around grief and some different kinds of online, and once we get back to being in person, some of those in-person things are great to or just getting an actual therapist for your own situation. Because one of the other things that's true is we all grieve so differently. We even just grieving, if you get a terminal diagnosis yourself, like there's a way that you're also grieving your future. And so you need support around that. And you need support around what it's like to suddenly have to revise your expectations about what you're doing. So on the, I do certain episodes, the last episode of the year, I actually talked about 3 different books that have 3 different ways of looking at the world. One of them being a much more like yoga, spiritual, meditation based orientation. Another one being a much more Christian, medical, kind of more traditional orientation. And the third one being a first person point of view, a memoir by somebody who is dying. And all 3 of them, I think, have incredible lessons. They all speak to different audiences, and they're all incredibly valuable. So there's no, there is no one size fits all. My goal is to become, maybe I'm both a journalist and a librarian of death. So like, I'm going to see if I can read all the things and I could have something I can put you to,
I want to see that on a business card.
Yes.
Librarian of death.
Not the Grim Reaper, I'm the Grim Librarian. Yeah. Yes, that's
there's another thing that comes up from time to time. I'm curious if you run into this or if you prep people for this. We've talked about the surprises that people get as far as like we didn't know they wanted to be buried this way, or we didn't know that they wanted a Jewish ceremony and they're Buddhist or whatever. But sometimes there's surprises that come up in people's lives that you weren't expecting. Like there may be another family that shows up at the funeral. There might be secrets that come out. Do you talk to people about that? Like be prepared, because you may find a box under the bed that you weren't expecting to find. Or something.
Well, I'm going to do a few things that are on secrets. And actually I personally have an advanced team of friends that is going to come in and do an initial sweep.
Clear your browser.
Exactly. Like, not like my family doesn't know certain things, but they certainly are like, I don't need to see it. And I'm like, that's cool. There are some that are much more deep secrets that people have, tried to bury with them. And I have a personal story around that as well. A big secret that came out about after my mom died, and the conversation that I wanted to have with her 7-something years ago was around asking her, like, is this true? And I couldn't ask her because she was dead, and it was really hard. And so sort of drawing from that experience of like how much that re-triggered me into grieving her and missing her and just feeling this loss and just feeling this absence in my life. I am a strong believer in we are now in the age of the internet. Whatever you think is going to stay a secret isn't. And so how are you going to plan for that? Can you at least write a letter to let somebody know that you were intending to tell them when they got old enough, or that, you just prep it in some way so that they can learn your side of the story after you're gone. I just read a book, Beach Reads, is actually centered on that story. And
oh, really?
The storyline is, it's a woman's father dies, and then she discovers this whole like other, he had a girlfriend and a house and a whole other thing, and her grappling with what that means. And of course, it's a lighthearted romance in the middle of it. But you know, it's but it was kind of interesting as a structure for a novel, and it's certainly something that people do have hidden parts of their lives. Maybe even just, it doesn't even have to necessarily be something dark like that. It could be like, oh, what is her name? The photographer who, after she died, they found all these incredible photographs. And now she's had retrospectives, and she's like one of the most, she's a very powerful street photographer.
Oh, Arbus.
No, it wasn't Diane Arbus.
It wasn't Arbus?
No, somebody who actually did not publish while she was alive.
Oh.
Yeah, or like Emily Dickinson with the poems under her bed. Like, so, you know, there are things that people will learn, new things about you after you die. And so like, kind of, how do you think about that? How do you prepare for that? And my personal feeling is you just have to expect that those secrets are going to come out, and make some conscious decisions about how you want them to come out, and recognize the impact that they'll have on your people.
On some of the darker stuff, I mean, without diving into it, but I mean, you've also got a situation where, you know, every family has secrets to a certain degree of some type. And when somebody passes away, they may have been involved in those secrets, or they may have been the cause of them, or the recipient of something that happened. There's another opportunity for healing, because I know a lot of families, when someone died, they're like, good, they're dead. We never have to talk to that side of the family again, or we have to, you know, that's happened in my family.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's an opportunity for healing, and to say, look, you know, this person is gone now. Can't we come together and figure out, it's time to bury the hatchet. It's time, whatever it is, you know, it could be something minimal that got blown out of proportion, or it could be something really, truly horrible in the family. But again, it's a way to get closer. It's a way to use this tragic event in order to make your life work better, in order to move ahead as a human being.
Yeah. I think that the entire process of dying, as well as after somebody's died, is that kind of opportunity for sure. And it's a moment where you're all kind of in the same boat of missing somebody, or of grappling with somebody's death, whether it's missing them or being happy about it or whatever it is, that there's something that's like a moment in time that is actually unifying people that maybe are completely separated otherwise. And so you learn about yourself and them. And yeah, I agree with you. I think that there's a great opportunity there if you can take it, and if you have the stomach for it. Honestly, some people don't.
Yeah. Is there any country, like we talked about Sweden, but is there any country where you kind of go, you know what, they got it right? They know what they're doing. You know, Egypt, they build these big pyramids, they throw the body in, and it worked out really well.
Yeah. They don't really build so many pyramids now. It's like, they don't.
You know,
it's a pretty intense
McDonald's.
Land use. You know, yeah, totally.
We thought the concrete vault was bad.
Exactly. There's like whole like, you know, slave built pyramids is a bad thing. So there's elements of different cultures' death practices that I think are totally fascinating and really wonderful. So I'm half Filipina, and when my grandfather died in the Philippines, I went through my first ever experience of that more traditional Filipino style thing, where they do have a wake, which is much more in line with how we used to do things in this country up until essentially the Second World War, where the body would lie in state for X number of days to allow people to get there to make it in time for the funeral. And in the Philippines, the traditional way is that the body is never left alone. So people stay 24 hours a day, multiple days on end, and other people start coming in. And so it was a really fascinating cycle. I stayed there for a couple of days, and people would arrive, and then they go immediately to the body and they start crying and, oh my gosh, and, you know, the wailing, the whole thing. And then after a little while, they're like, tears dry out. They're kind of like they've moved through that initial wave of emotion, and then they kind of look around and they see other people. Oh, it's so great to see you here. And then you start chatting, you start telling stories, and then eventually it's like, oh, where's the bathroom? And are you hungry? And like you're there for hours. And so it turns into this thing where as the way that I felt, it was like an opportunity to metabolize somebody's death by a community.
Mm.
And it was really neat to me how that span of time, as opposed to like what I've experienced in many funerals here in the United States, where you're allowed a viewing for a limited amount of time, and it's like a couple of hours, then you sort of move in and out, and and then you go to the funeral, and it's like you oftentimes the body isn't even lowered into the earth as while people are still there, or sometimes it is, but they don't cover it up, and so there's like everything feels rushed and kind of like time bound,
scheduled, very scheduled,
yeah. And so this experience of this like more expanded time, this allowing, I started to see the incredible wisdom of that. And it is the way that things used to be here. The front parlor was a place that was for viewing bodies. And, I heard about even in some houses on the East Coast, like specifically in Vermont, there are like marble slabs in the basement that are actually for keeping bodies cold. When you can't bury them for a little while, you have to like keep them on ice. And so there's a way that historically in many, many cultures that they do that, where they sit with a body for a while, and there's no rush to bury it right away. I also think that I do like the Irish wake. I love the whole, I like the sitting and swapping stories and inviting in multiple threads of somebody's life and meeting people maybe that you never met while they were alive, but you start to discover new things about the person who's died because, oh, you're friends with that person also? Like, how did that happen? And, I didn't know that he was so important to the bus driver or the, whatever. And you start to see the impact of somebody's life through that sort of extended storytelling,
Yeah. I would think there is a bit of a need for, we overschedule it. We definitely do, but isn't there a point where you have to kind of draw the line? Because I am sure there are some people that would let, if it wasn't a decomposition issue, I think there's some people that would sit there and have that body in their house for a long time because they weren't ready to let go.
Yes.
So there almost seems to be a place for somebody to say, you know what, I know you're in pain, but we have to draw a line. And we have to, we have to start the next process, and that's burying it or burying your loved one. You hear these stories about these. Some of them are probably urban legends, but you hear stories about somebody's mother died or their child died, and they didn't tell anybody, and they keep them in their house or something. And, or they self mummified them, or they did some odd thing.
Yeah, and there's Caitlin Doughty is the queen of all of this stuff. She has the Ask a Mortician channel on YouTube, and she's amazing. That as an amazing author, and she was writing about. I'm trying to remember. I think it is in Indonesia, where the money for a funeral is, the funerals are elaborate, expensive affairs. They're just, and they also only happen at particular times. And this is it's not all over Indonesia. This is like a particular place. And so they do keep the body in the house for like months, years, while they're accumulating the money. And they also they start to like, well, grandpa's still here. Well, we're still working on this. So there's a way that it's like becomes part of life that, dead grandpa is part of the family as well, still here doing the whole thing. And I'm like, it's just a different attitude. Like there's also an incredible way that it just normalizes being dead, especially for the kids. And, here we're so like, oh, they keep the kids away. They shouldn't, we need to protect. I'm like, I think that that's really unhealthy. And you don't have to go all the way.
That, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't have to go all the way to like keeping grandpa in your house for a couple of years, but there's gotta be a happy medium where we let kids know that life is a cycle and that change happens, and you're like it's everything changes, everything goes away, new things keep emerging.
Yeah.
That's the way that this world works.
How do you when people have kids, how do you talk to them about how to talk to the kids? What advice, or I don't like to say advice because we've talked about it a few times.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not your job.
Yeah.
But you're a caring human being, and I'm sure you
Yeah.
see these situations where you're like, I have things I can share with them that may soften this, that may help
Yeah.
them. I mean, how do you do that with kids when they have
Well,
that situation?
I'll start off by acknowledging that I'm not a parent and I can't tell other people how to parent. And I do know that like everybody has to be making their own decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But I have spent a lot of time around children, and I have taken care of a lot of kids in more extended times than, you know, your average single childless person. And kids are very observant, and they observe and feel what adults are feeling around them. And if you don't tell them what's going on, then they're just going to start making up stories, and probably making up stories that are worse than the reality and that involve them having done something wrong. And so they're going to start imagining that they're the reasons that you're crying all the time. And that's like that's a terrible thing. And so it's easier, and I feel better for the kids to get them used to this idea that like nothing is permanent, and that it's a part of life. And if you can actually like expose them to that early on, or talk about it in a normal way. I mean, but then the first trick is, are you comfortable talking about it even with your friends? Most of us aren't. And if you can't talk about death with your friends, I don't know how you're going to talk about it with your kids without traumatizing them. But it is important for us to get comfortable with talking about it ourselves. And if somebody that you're close to, or, you know, the grandparent dies or whatever, like, let the kids know and let them actually experience it. And also don't try to rush their feelings along. If they're sad, let them be sad. Don't make them self-conscious about feeling sad or feel bad about it or anything like that, because what you do by doing that is sort of train them to hide. And that's not good either. But if instead you're just like, yeah, I'm sad too, and then, you know, I feel like crying, how about you? And you just cry together.
Yeah.
Like, it can bring you closer.
The one that always bothers me, and you don't hear this as much as you used to. I guess kids are getting smarter earlier, but when parents say something like, oh, well, grandpa is just sleeping, but he's not going to wake up, or something. Have you ever heard that? And it's like, they try to, they're like, oh, well, I'm going to relate it to something that the kid can understand. Well, now you've terrified this child, because they think they're going to go to sleep.
They're going to go sleep and they're not going to wake up. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Or the one that super bothers me is, they're in a better place now. Oh my God. I hate that so much. So many of the things that we say to grieving people are terrible things to say.
We do.
Like, and they're in a better place now is like, because they're not with me now. Like, is being with me terrible? Yeah. You know, oh, that's just awful. And it you know, it just sort of negates the beauty of being here and being with the people that are here. We do that too. Another one, when my father died, you know, I explained to you, I'm like, we weren't close. We had issues. There was a whole drama there. And I was a arrogant, angry young man. And you were a 19-year-old guy. Like, I know. I went on a 9-month drinking binge afterwards. It was just because I had issues. But people would always say, I'm so sorry for your loss. Oh, God. And I would look right at him and be like, you never met him. No, you aren't. Or I would say something like that. And looking back, I was being really rude, and I could have said it normally, but really that's mean. How I felt. I was like, it wasn't your fault. I just got super mean. You didn't meet him. Yeah. I'm like, are you really sorry, or are you making yourself feel better? And there's, you know, there's so many dynamics that go back and forth on both sides. You know, and I admit that I could have handled it better, but I was an angry young man. Yeah. But at the same time, it's like, I feel like people should watch there's a better way to approach it. There's a much better way. If somebody knew
if when your mother passed, if somebody knew your mom, knew you, was involved in it, and they said, I'm so sorry for your loss, I'm sure you went, you know what, that person really is, because they knew
Yeah.
them and they were probably feeling pain to a certain degree. But if some random stranger, this still happens to me. My father died when I was in the 90s. So we're talking almost
It's been
30
a minute.
years.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I'll talk to people and I'll tell them that we'll get to talk about my parents. And I'm like, oh yeah, my dad died in a plane crash when I was 19. And they're like, I am so sorry. I'm like, it was 30 years ago. I'm like,
Right.
there's no weight to what you're saying to me, because it's almost like, have a nice day at the
It's
cash register.
yeah, it's a full-on
It's
reflexive response. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. And so it feels empty of meaning. And as a result, it's actually disconnecting.
Mhm.
That's the thing, is even if they're like mostly saying it because they want to say something to acknowledge what you said, but they don't really know what to say. So they say that. And
Mhm.
you're like, yeah, you're right. It's just the have a nice day. Does that really matter to you? When you meet somebody, like, how are you? Are you going to listen to my response? It is
Yeah.
not a way to get connected with people. Yeah, I get really bothered by that response. I personally really hate it. And even when I was 15 and I was hearing it for the first time, it was
Mhm.
terrible. There's a book, because it's what I do. I recommend books. I'm your death librarian here. The book, "It's Okay That You're Not Okay" by Meg
Mhm.
Devine is absolutely brilliant, and I highly recommend it to people who are also not grieving themselves, but there is somebody in their life who is grieving, or they just want to sort of be prepped for the future where somebody might be grieving,
Mhm.
because there's a lot of really great tools in there about how to talk to somebody and what not to say, as well as what to say.
Yeah.
There's great ways to feel closer to somebody and say, oh, if that happened to me, I would feel terrible. Like suddenly, okay,
Yeah.
that I understand,
Exactly. Yeah.
um, maybe it's all about, like, are you actually being vulnerable in your share? The I'm sorry that happened, or I'm sorry for your loss. There's no vulnerability. There's no
Yeah.
connection.
It's an
What's a
opening for a conversation.
Totally.
It's an opening for two people to really
Mhm.
discuss it. One thing, and most people I think would go, oh my God, that's horrible. But one thing I like when people say, and this doesn't happen a lot, is if they know me or they want to get to know me, I'll tell them that and they go, oh wow, how did that affect you?
Yes.
Or and they use it to get to know how I think or how I react to things, or to get
Mhm.
more of the background. And it
Mhm.
seems invasive, and for some people it might be, but for
Yeah.
me it's not.
Yeah,
So
and you could even say, like, wow, I would love to hear more about that. Are you willing to tell me any more? Because that
yeah.
also puts it back, like saying, like, I would like to own your interest, but then actually give the other person the opportunity, like, yeah, but not here. This bar is super loud. Or totally, yeah, let's give me a double shot of whiskey and
Yep.
I'm going to tell you the whole story. Like, so, it could go any way, but if you're actually, like, open to really hearing about it, and also if you
Mhm.
frame it in that way where it's something like, I would like to hear about it, are you willing to tell me? You're saying, I actually really want to listen to you.
Mhm.
And that is the most important thing. That is the thing that I think is kind of rare, because a lot of times when people say, like, I'm sorry for your loss, I feel like they're like, I don't really want to hear about that.
Yeah.
That's also what I hear when
Yeah.
somebody says that
There's another
is,
side to that too. Do you ever get people that are like, I'll use myself as an example again. Like, oh, well, my father died when I was
mhm.
younger. And they're like, oh, that's horrible. When my mother died, or da 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 da
Oh
da da da
God.
da
Yeah.
da da da.
Yeah.
And then they go, oh, it's just like, and this
Yeah.
happens to me a lot because I told you my dad died in a plane crash. So
Right.
I'll have this conversation. I don't always say that's how he died. And somebody will be like, oh, your father passed away. That's just like when my uncle died, when he did this and this and this. And then I'm like, no, absolutely nothing
False
like that.
equivalency. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're like, so how did your dad die? Oh, he died in a plane crash. And like their eyes get really big and their
Yeah.
jaw drops and they realize, I just messed up. I
Yeah.
shouldn't have said that. They
Yeah.
assume all deaths are the same.
Yeah.
You know,
Or even if they know somebody who did die in a plane crash, that doesn't make it the same.
no,
It's still an individual person and an individual experience. I mean, it's also like, I find it terrible when somebody is like, oh, that's terrible. How did it make you feel? And I'm like, well, one, I don't know you. Two, I was 15. Three, this is not the time and place. We are in a business meeting, so
I
like,
was gonna say, can you just give me my Starbucks, please?
yeah, exactly. It's like, this is not me like wanting to open up salacious details. You're not going to like make me cry right now. This is not something I'm going to do. So just because suddenly you're affected by hearing that doesn't mean that I'm ready to be affected by telling you. So that's another thing. Like, I think all of those things those are all wrong. Those are all on my no list. Don't do that. The it's just like, you should never ever start.
Oh.
And the other shorthand that Meg Devine lays out that I love is, if you ever start a sentence with a phrase, at least, you should not say that. So, at least he died doing something that he loved, or at least you had 12 years together. At least it went quick. They went quickly. Like, if you ever say that, at least, just, that is not something that should ever come out of your mouth.
No, there's people maybe it's
another,
part of the grieving. Maybe it's part of the grieving is that we generalize.
Yeah, well,
you know what I mean?
I personally think that it's a way that somebody's trying to make themselves feel better.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so like, wow, that sounds really painful. I'm going to put a happy spin on it because that makes me feel better. So,
but it's all about you.
Exactly. So that's where the at least stuff comes from, is that somebody's like skirting the actual issue, and they want to say something positive or backpedal out of the conversation in some way.
It feels to me like the biggest theme that I'm seeing in our conversation as we start to wrap this up is, it's not a one size fits all issue. And
Correct.
because we don't have these discussions to see all of the different shades of everybody's experience, we make these mistakes and we hurt people when we're trying to help them, or we're not able to heal when we should be. And there's all of these problems that we're having because, once again, we're not communicating with each other. It seems like communication is just at the crux of everything in our world. And this is another example of that.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. As well as being uncomfortable with the uncomfortable, and being comfortable with the uncomfortable, and being comfortable with the unknown. So, all of those things, like being authentic to how you're feeling and being open to having a conversation with somebody that makes you unhappy or uncomfortable or confusing, that all of that stuff is we're not very well practiced at it.
We're not.
We're not at all. We're not at all. And so, you're right. We have to get more into having those conversations, learn how to have conversations about stuff that's hard, learn how to not be so damn polite all the time sometimes, because sometimes you're like, oh, well, I don't want to make them feel bad if I push them to ask them if they, like, sometimes you have to, like, I need to know, like, what do you want done with your body? I need to know, like, who should I call? And that's all. It's all practice. It gets easier over time. Not everybody has to turn out like me, where you just like say the word dead, dead, dead all the time. But but you can get a little farther and actually just like have a few people that know what you want, and and then you can also like be around people who are grieving by like sharing that you just feel bad and you wish that you could help. One of the best letters that I got when my mom died was from a friend of mine who's, wise beyond his years, all of like 15, 14 years old, wrote me a letter. And I had been hurt that he hadn't really like come and talk to me directly for days after my mom died. And then he handed me this letter and he's like, I've been wanting to talk with you. Your mom was an amazing person, and I don't know how to talk with you without crying. And I don't think that that's what you need right now. So that's why I haven't talked with you. And I was like,
It's perfect.
totally perfect.
Yeah.
Totally perfect. And like, we should all be so perfect as that 14-year-old to say, this is what's going on. I want to reach out to you. I don't want to make your, it's your mom, not mine. But I'm still falling apart over here. So yeah, like just
The
be
only
honest.
thing it could have made it better is if they brought you a casserole. That's the only thing.
I was running out of freezer space, so.
You're from Vermont, don't you have the big one out in the garage?
That's right. That's right. It's like the marble slab. It's actually for casseroles. Yeah. Yeah.
This is I can't believe I'm saying this, but this has been a very fun conversation about death.
That's what I aim for.
There you go.
Yeah.
So where do people find you? What is let's lead people down the road to death.
Yes.
Where do they find you?
So the podcast is called Dying Kindness, like loving kindness but dying, or death and dying. And the website is dyingkindness.com. And you can also find me at ciannastewart.com because I do that and a bunch of other things too. So, but the big thing is Dying Kindness, the podcast.
Yeah, and it's in the show notes, so everybody can click through on that. Do you do the social media?
I'm getting there. The social media. Yeah. I mean, it's
going to be on your deathbed. I wish I did on Instagram.
Well, I am a one-person operation. So, I do all the interviews and I edit all the stuff myself and get it out. And so I am doing it a slow rollout. There will be more socials in the future. There is a Facebook group. There's a Slack group. And I occasionally have office hours and stuff like that. So there's different ways, and there will be more socials in the future, but just go to dyingkindness.com, then you'll find all the things.
Yeah, we'll get people over to the website. So
yep, I also have a bunch of books that I recommend over there. Surprise.
Oh,
so yeah,
the Death Librarian. This is gonna be an interesting week. On Tuesday we had the Paranormal Detective, and now we have the Death Librarian.
Hey,
so
fantastic.
it's nickname week. It's just I get a nickel every time somebody says it, though. This has been I really appreciate you talking with me. And
yeah, this has been very fun.
It's an interesting approach. And thanks for listening to my stories about dead people in my family. So
love it. Always here to lend an ear.
Support comes from the History's Train Wrecks podcast that focuses on stories like a temper tantrum that changed history, the president who promised not to run again and regretted it for the rest of his life, the World War II general who lost his pants on a secret mission in enemy territory. The History's Train Wrecks podcast, available now.
Hey everybody, hope you enjoyed the show. Help us spread the word by subscribing and leaving a review. If you want to support us even more, you can find a link to our Patreon account in the show notes. And if you're one of our diehard fans, head on over to the VikingDogStore.com, where you can find official Open Highway merchandise to show your support to the entire world. But most of all, thanks for listening.
For the highways of America, which for so many years were an assortment of as many designs and pavements as there were states, are now becoming one big road that can take you anywhere faster, safer, and more directly than ever before. What is this big road? Where is it going? How much has been built? How much is yet to come? These are questions we ask. Certainly traveling the entire system would be a memorable experience, but few of us have the time for such a trip.
Copyright Viking Dog 2022. All rights reserved. The Open Highway is a trademark of Viking Dog LLC.